It has now been 2 months since I started playing Old School, well 3 if you count leagues, and I've gotten myself accustomed to the powers of RuneLite. It provides so many quality of life things that logging into the main client or a mobile feels like I'm playing a whole different game. With that in mind, I wanted to talk about 5 plugins that I think would be great for RS3. I wanted to pick plugins that would have a benefit to the player, but also be something that Jagex themselves could implement. So something like the very powerful quest helper would have to be ignored, as it's not something Jagex would implement themselves. I'm also going to be ignoring any plugin that has a similar version already existing in the game. For example, the Clue Scroll plugin in Old School is better in my opinion, but it exists in Alt 1 already and does about 90% of it, so that doesn't really fit well on the list. First up, we have one of my favorite plugins, Ground Markers. This lets you mark any tile in the game and it gives an outline of that tile. You can also give it a label if you want to annotate what the tile is. So far, the best use of the plugin that I have gotten on my Iron Man is marking where to stand so that I can effectively AFK Ammonite crabs. However, when I was doing high-level PVM on leagues, it was very valuable to be able to mark tiles, as while I was learning a boss, I could put reminders on where to stand, making the process that much easier. On RS3, the very first thing that comes to mind is Angel of Death. The way that my team kills the boss, you need to use abilities on specific tiles. And if I could mark those tiles, it would not only be a good reminder for me, someone who's done it over 1,500 times, but also a great way to help people learn the boss. You show them the tiles you have marked, you get them to mark those tiles, label them accordingly, like you label the ZGS spec as the ZGS spec tile, and it's just one less thing to worry about and makes the learning process a hell of a lot easier. And I think that's part of why it's easier to pick up things on Old School, is because you have this built-in training feature. Next up, I think, is the most important plugin to port over to RS3, and that's Entity Hider. It's a pretty simple plugin. It gives you the ability to hide other players, other pets, or NPCs. This plugin was a blessing when I was training thieving with Arty Knights, as about 100 plus people were all around me, causing distractions, making it tougher to click on the knight, but with one click of the Entity Hider, I could get rid of them, making my experience that much better. This plugin would be so good for portables training on RS3. There are so many people there that attempt to troll and distract people, and if you could just make them disappear in an instant, it would be wonderful. They'd probably stop trolling. Not to mention, it's great for YouTubers like me, as you can hide people from ruining your shots when you're super zoomed in and you want to get a personal intro. You don't have someone running across the screen right away, so I would love that. The third plugin is one that will fix a massive pet peeve of mine with RS3, and that it's nearly impossible to accurately calculate the amount of experience you're gonna gain. There are just too many boosts and they interact in too many ways that while you get close, you never really get it on the dot. With an XP calculator plugin, you could pull all of those boosts, and because it's Jagex who is creating the plugin, they know exactly how the code works with the boosts and can pull that code into the plugin. Also, the XP calculator plugin on Old School allows you to select multiple items, so when you're making something like an Elder Overload, which has 8 steps, you can select all of those steps at once and get the total XP per overload made. It's just a much simpler way of getting that math done, and you don't accidentally get 200 mil herblore when you only wanted to get 150 mil XP. A good application of this on Old School is fletching broad arrows on an Iron Man. I'd have to make the arrow shafts, headless arrows, and broad arrows as a 3-step process, and I can select all 3 of those and I can calculate how many times I'll have to do that process. The fourth plugin is probably the least important one on this list, at least for me, but for some colorblind folk it'll be really nice. It's called Item Identification, and what it does is it gives text-based identification for items that look similar or are just a separate color but the same item type. It has a wide variety of item sets that can be identified, and they are all customizable. There are 2 text formats, one that just gives the starting letter of the item, so if you're a nerd like me and have memorized all the items in the game, you can just stick with that. But if you need more detailed assessment, you can change it to have a longer version of the word. I really only need the seed/sapling one, as those are just identical to each other, and I can tell apart a sapphire and an emerald very easily. But for others who might struggle with that, I can see value in the other categories, and it would be very nice to have in RS3. The last plugin is the Big Kahuna, and I think it's arguably the single best RuneLite plugin. Menu Entry Swapper. It's a complicated plugin, but it basically does two things. It allows you to customize what NPC's left-click options are. For example, all the shops in the game are left-click talk, right-click trade, but with this plugin, I can now make it all left-click trade. You don't realize how powerful it is until you've hopped 100+ times in a row, and saving one right-click each hop is a blessing. The second thing that it does is that it gives you the ability to customize shift-clicking. For those of you that don't know, shift clicking basically gives you a second option. So for most items, it defaults to shift click drop, much like how the action bar in RS3 works. I used this to great lengths while 3-tick fishing on my way to 99. I had changed the shift click option on the knife to be used. This meant that I could merely hold down the shift key instead of having to release the shift key every time I wanted to use the knife on the logs. It's just so nice. And that saved my fingers, saved me a lot of time because I probably wouldn't have 3-ticked without Menu Entry Swapper. The way I see this working on RS3 is that it gives you the ability to customize what the action bar does. Right now, most items have drop as their default action on the action bar, which makes it nice for auto-dropping items while skilling. But for some items like logs, which have another option to craft, it's very annoying to drop them with the action bar, as when you try to click the action bar button, it ends up crafting instead of dropping. With Menu Entry Swapper, you would be able to customize what that option is, and you'd be able to drop those logs instead of crafting. It sounds small, but it just makes the biggest difference in the world. There it is. Those are the 5 RuneLite plugins that I think would improve RS3. Obviously, there are some technical limitations with the RS3 client in comparison, but those issues notwithstanding, I don't see why these wouldn't be a good part of RS3. I've long been saying that both games need to take the best parts about the other game and bring it to their game, and one of the best parts about Old School is the customizability that RuneLite gives players. That's the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like down below, and if you have a plugin that you'd like to see in RS3, drop it down below in a comment. Past that, have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.